Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/IDontWorkHereLady, where people can't seem to tell the difference between an employee and a customer. Guys, the stories today are super duper entertaining, so get ready for a few good laughs and some head shaking. And as always, I hope you enjoy the stories and do hit that subscribe button for future tales. We're diving in, guys. This happened last weekend. I went to my local blue box store to pick up a few grocery items. It wasn't a big trip, but it had to be done. Now, I'm a short woman, around 4'11", and it never ceases to amaze me that most things I want or need are always on the top shelf. The only way I can reach these items is if I have something long enough to rake it off the top shelf, or I can use the shelves as a climbing wall. And considering that I'm not lightweight by any stretch of the imagination, I don't try climbing in favor of keeping the shelves upright. So I swung down an aisle and found what I was looking for on the top shelf. Since the item was a glass bottle, raking it off the top shelf seemed like a disaster waiting to happen. So I ended up standing there for several minutes, trying to decide if this was something I could do without, when I spotted a very tall guy. The tall guy had his own shopping cart. He wasn't dressed like a store employee. He was wearing jeans, a black button-up shirt, and no blue vest. He was also looking at his shopping list. Now, my interest was in the fact that he was towering at around 6'3". I approached the man and say, "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you." Now, the tall guy had a look on his face like he's ready to say, "I don't work here, lady." But he said, "Yes." Now, I tried making myself as meek and apologetic as I could, so that he didn't think that he had encountered one of those people. I asked him if I could borrow his height to help me get something from the top shelf. The tall guy smiles, nods, and then asked what I needed help with. I point at the item, and without so much as a struggle, he retrieved it. I then smiled politely and thanked him profusely for helping me, and I put the item in my cart and he started to walk away. Then she made her presence known. She was about 5'4", around 45 years old, pudgy rolls around the middle, and she wore a sparkly dress that was about 3 sizes too small, and so short that if she took a deep breath, we'd all get a view of her belly button. She honestly looked like she was going to a nightclub, not grocery shopping at 1:30 in the afternoon. Karen says, "So, now that you're finished with her, you can get these for me." Karen then attempted to hand the tall guy her shopping list, but he put his hands up and backed up a bit, saying, "Hey, I don't work here, I was only helping her get something." Karen then says, "Exactly. You helped her, now you help me." The tall guy then responds with, "No, I helped her, and now I'm gonna finish my own shopping." Karen then rolls her eyes and tried to shove her list at him, saying, "I'm not stupid. Of course you work here. Why else would you help her?" He then responds, "Do you really believe that people who work for a living are only working to serve you?" Now, Karen couldn't decide if she should nod or shake her head. I could almost hear the gears in her brain strain for a response, and she says, "It's your job to do what I tell you to do." The tall guy then tells her, "No, it's my job to do what my boss tells me to do. And not once in 14 years has my boss ever told me that I had to do your shopping." At this point, Karen gets all huffy and says, "Oh yes, it is your job. You work here, so you work for me. And I'm telling you to get these items on my list. Now." The tall guy then steps closer to her, reached into his shirt pocket where he had his white clerical collar. The white collar that priests wear, for those that don't know. He then snapped it on and plastered on the biggest grin. And he says, "In that case, you need to get down on your knees and talk to my boss. I think the two of you have plenty to discuss." Karen's face then went deathly white. She ran, took very fast shuffling steps out of the aisle. And I just stood there with my mouth open. The tall guy removed the clerical collar and tucked it back into his shirt pocket. And him, seeing my amazement and adoration of what he'd just done, said, "Oh, don't look so impressed, I'm not clergy. I do improv comedy with a small social group of friends." He then pats his shirt pocket and said, "This week's theme is church. I just came to get some snacks on my way there." Now I'm even more impressed. Tall guy and I share a laugh and parted ways, and I didn't see him or Karen again. For some reason, however, I have this strange desire to watch stand-up comedy on TV. I love how Tall Guy dealt with the situation. Like, using the clerical collar to shut down a Karen was already entertaining. But when he said he wasn't a part of the clergy, but was a part of a comedy improv group, oh my goodness. This man became my hero. So I work as a nurse at the local jail, and this plays a role later. I took it upon myself to hit the nearby supermarket during my lunch break to pick up some stuff to go with the chef salad I made. I love salads. Now, this place isn't big, but it's always clean and the staff are always nice. I head down the aisle split of crackers, cookies, and bottled drinks. I get down about halfway when I notice a sweet old lady struggling to reach something over her head. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall. I stop and ask her if I can help. Now, I'm about 5 foot 10 inches, so there isn't much out of my reach. She then points out her item, I grab it for her, and she thanks me for the help. I tell her that my mom's about her size, so I'm used to it, and I'm just glad she wasn't stuck waiting too long for help. So right about then, I hear it. The Karen. Well, crazy Karen, as you'll find out real soon. Karen says to me, "Now that you're done helping that old bag, you need to come over here. I need a rice bag in my cart." Now, me turning to look at her said, "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't work here. I was just stopping to help her." Karen then says, "I don't want to hear your excuse, okay? Do your job." Now, at this point, I motion to my scrubs and say, "Seriously, I don't work here. I work as a nurse." I start to walk away when Karen grabs my arm to stop me, and she says, "Okay, well, let's pretend you're an employee. Excuse me, employee, do your job, now." Now, I snatch my arm away, thinking that this lady is a little cuckoo. I then tell her, "Lady, if you touch me again, I will end you. Again, I don't work here, so go find an associate to do that." I then take a few steps, and I see a damn can fly by my head. Cue demonic possession Karen mode. I turn around to see this psycho wielding another can of veggies as she chucks it at me as hard as she can. Missing again, thank God. All the while screaming about how lazy I am and she will have my job. Now, mind you, I'm backing further away when a cashier who can see down the aisle from the register runs in our direction, and another apparently called the cops. So Karen continues to yell and throw items, not only at me, but at the staff that start to accumulate. Nothing she's saying is making any sense. A little while later, an officer makes it to the scene. He attempts to calm the woman down and of course ends up putting her in handcuffs. During which, she screams that he's trying to grab her lady parts, accuses him of assaulting her, and tries to bite the guy. The staff and sweet old lady all give statements about the incident. The old lady was a little shaken, but unharmed, as she ended up behind Karen after she grabbed me. Once he has her under control, I check out and head back to work. I stop in medical to tell the registered nurse about the Karen, and that she'll need to book her in for me. I then clean the nail marks on my arm, and yes, she did dig deep enough to draw blood, and we head back to the booking. Now, it did take some time for them to show up. Apparently, when she was in the cruiser, she began yelling about her kid being in the car, an 8-year-old kid. So they had to call the kid's father. So we're all standing in booking when the exterior door slides open, and here comes the officer with crazy Karen in tow, still acting completely bonkers. Now, the booking process, medically speaking, is pretty quick. Vitals and a few questions. Do you have any health problems? Are you on medications? Are you feeling homicidal? Are you feeling suicidal? When Karen out of nowhere sees me and locks her eyes on me and says, "What the hell is that bitch doing here?" The officer says, "She works here." Karen's demeanor then changes. She calms down and it's an eerily calm. And she says, "Take these handcuffs off me. I want her dead." The nurse then tells me to go into the office and attempts to perform the booking assessment. Crazy Karen is pretty much ignoring all of the questions and cussing at the nurse, yelling about killing me when she gets her hands free. To this, the nurse says to the officers, "Yeah, she appears to be homicidal by her own admission. She needs to go to self-harm observation." So the crazy Karen was charged for assault, child endangerment, assault on an officer, and possession of coke. She was placed in a psych cell with nothing but a turtle suit on for the weekend. So the upside of this situation. The father of the kid called me earlier this week to thank me, because he's been trying to get custody of the child, and with this arrest, he's got a good shot of taking her on and giving her some normalcy. I'm glad something good came of this. But there is a downside. I work the wings during medication pass, and this woman will now be in until who knows when, so I'll have updates on the Karen drama, I'm sure. To think, all of this started over a trip for ranch dressing and Triscuits. You know what, if it wasn't OP, it probably would have been someone else for sure. Guys, I have read so many of these stories, but this is the first where someone actually decides to pick up a can, or a few cans actually, and use them as weapons. But jokes aside, in this instance, the Karen definitely needed some help, and I truly hope she gets the help she needs, because throwing tantrums in public and assaulting others with cans of beans, yeah, that's not cool. In my youth, my family was rather poor. We were lower middle class. My dad, who could not read or write, worked graveyard shifts at a creamery. My mother was a housewife and was very active in PTA and other community activities. My dad's job paid the bills and put staple foods on the table, but left no room for comfort expenses. As soon as I was old enough, I got a paper route, and the monthly funds went towards padding our family budget. Now, one simple joy we took pleasure in was once a month, we would splurge on a quiet salad and pizza dinner at the local Pizza Hut. Now, this story takes place 1987 or 1988, about there-ish. I was about 14 years old at the time. We arrived one Sunday afternoon at the local pizza parlor. So we go in, sat down at the regular table, and waited for the waitress to come take our order. We talked, we waited, we cracked jokes, and we waited some more. We start to realize that something was not quite right after about 15 minutes. Now, we had heard the phone ring a few times, but other than that, there was none of the usual sounds of bustling workers in the kitchen area. I was curious, so I slid out of the bench and approached the cashier's counter. Looking around in the back area, I could not see a living soul. I called out, "Hello," but there was nothing. I then yelled again and said, "Anybody back there?" with no response. Now, I was feeling that distinct edgy feeling that one gets while watching a horror movie. I returned back to my parents and informed them what I discovered, or should I say, lack of discovery. My dad suggested that I check the restrooms, and my mom agreed. She then checked the women's room while my dad checked the men's. There was no one. Now, we were all very concerned, and a little more than frightened, as we had heard on TV and in newspaper stories how sometimes a robbery goes bad, and it was only discovered when employee bodies were found. My mom suggested calling the police and pointed to the phone on the wall, which chose at that very moment to ring out loud, making all of us jump in fright. I then said, "The freezer," to which my mom said, "What? The freezer. In horror movies, that's where the bodies are always at, right? I'll take a look." "The hell you will," my mom responded with authority. "Your father will check it." Now, my beloved father, the man I admired most in the world, pointed at me and said, "He runs faster." So in the end, I did indeed go behind the counter, by the simple fact that my parents were too busy arguing over who would go check in the back to notice me walking off. First, I armed myself with an impressively large and surprisingly sharp round pizza cutter sitting on the counter. Next, I checked the entirety of the back area. And then I checked the manager's office cubicle, and finally I approached the freezer. Now, I knew what I was about to find. I've seen this scene in plenty of movies. By this point, both my parents noticed my absence and had joined me, staring at the freezer door with morbid anticipation. I grabbed the handle, pulled, and threw the door open. And sure enough, there staring back at us was boxes of pizza-making supplies, but no bodies. I was, truth to tell, morbidly disappointed. There was nobody. There was no bodies, nothing, no workers. We were the only ones in the pizza parlor. And then we hear it. "Hello?" A call from the front. So quickly we approached the front. I recall my heart racing a mile, thinking an employee had arrived, only to find a middle-aged gentleman waiting along with his wife by the "wait to be seated" sign. He then says, "Oh, there you are. We would like a table for two." My mother replied, "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't work here." What do you mean you don't work here? You just came from the back. Is this a joke?" My mom explained, "No, it's no joke. There's nobody here. We checked." The man then says, "Yes, I can see the place is empty, so can we have a table in the back?" My mom further elaborates and said, "We don't work here. As far as we can tell, there's nobody here that's supposed to be here. So where can we sit?" At that point, my dad chimes in and says, "Oh, just find a place to park your butts. The place is empty." Now, my father is blunt. He's honest and always absurdly practical, and he says, "Honey, I think we should just call the police. Let them know what we found." With that decided, my dad scuttled off to the salad bar. And let it be known, my father was never one to let an opportunity for a meal go to waste. So it took over an hour for the police officer to arrive. The reason it took so long, as the officer would explain later, was that dispatch had downgraded the call to non-emergency status. During the wait, however, we had to deal with a few things. The couple that had been seated demanded menus, and my dad, being the helpful sort, with a decidedly odd sense of humor, gave the couple menus. The couple then asked for one sweet tea and one unsweet with lemon, please. And I was already hitting the fountain machine, and my mom had found the coffee supplies, so what the hell, I brought them their drinks. They then said that they would like 2 dinner salads and a large pepperoni pizza. My dad pointed to the plates by the salad bar and told them, "Might be a few minutes on the pizza. Gotta wait for an employee to show up first, but you go ahead and eat as much salad as you want." And then one of the nearby churches let out, and people start to pour in. People would come in saying, "Hello, there's 4 of us." Or, "Hi, we've got 2 more coming." Or, "I've tried calling several times, can I please get 2 large pizzas to go?" So by now, the police officer arrived, and my mom and I were effectively running the parlor along with the guy who came in from the church with his family. He said he once worked at the other Pizza Hut in town while in college. So my mom took orders, and I delivered drinks and food, and the young man made the pizzas. As for my dad, he was busy eating and chatting with the customers. As for people paying for food, neither my father or I could calculate our way past 10 fingers and 10 toes. So my mom dealt with that. She figured up the amount, including tax, and had them pay with a check. The checks were then slid under the cash register, and the cash register itself we did not even try to touch. When the officer arrived, we were quite happy to recognize him as one of the officers my dad was friends with. Officer Shield, as I'll call him. He immediately recognized my dad and asked what's going on. My dad explained the situation, and I butted in that we didn't find any dead bodies in the freezer. Now, Officer Shield first went to the register and opened it and confirmed that there was still cash in the till box. He then walked around the inside and outside of the building, and there were no signs whatsoever of any kind of disturbance. So he called it in and waited for orders from higher up. About 20 or 30 minutes later, I can't recall, he eventually got a call back telling him to lock up the place. They were trying to contact the owner of that franchise, but there was a problem. He couldn't find the keys to the parlor, and the main doors had to be locked from either the outside with a key, or the doors were locked from the inside with a latch, and then exited out the back door, which required a key to lock the bolt from the outside. Officer Shield called that fact back in. A few minutes later, a lead officer on shift arrived to evaluate the situation, and what did he find? A pizza parlor half full of customers happily chowing down on pizza. He then asked, understandably confused, why Officer Shield called in his report saying that there were no employees on the premise when clearly customers were being served. At which point, I so happily piped in and said, "Oh, we don't work here, we're just being helpful." So eventually the police managed to contact the owner after a couple of hours. The owner contacted the manager, and the manager comes stomping in, lots of anger and confusion. The manager, in a fluster, tried to accuse my parents and I of theft of company property, but Officer Shield would have none of that and pointed out the checks, the order slips, and the list of anything we used. He then pointed out the fact that we could have just left the place empty and thieves could have ransacked the parlor. So she then backed down and focused on contacting the workers that were supposed to be on duty. So it turns out the assistant manager had found out that very morning that her boyfriend was having an affair. She then decided to go on a tirade, taking her anger out on the male employees and verbally abusing them. They then chose not to take the abuse and walked out. The assistant manager then just decided to up and quit, leaving the shop wide open. She didn't even close it or anything. As for my parents and I, we were informed by Officer Shield very firmly that should we, for whatever reason, find ourselves in such a situation again, that it would be far more helpful if we refrained from being helpful. And yes, we did pay for our food and drinks, but we still got banned for life from that parlor. Guys, what an insane and super entertaining story. One of the most original stories I think I've read in a long time on this sub. Like, what would you even do in that situation? Like, I don't think I'd start serving people, that's for sure. But I definitely would call the police. And that, my friends, is another episode of r/IDontWorkHereLady. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories today. And if you missed yesterday's episode, I'll link it right here. OP is a corrections officer, and he gives everyone the scoop of what happens when entitled Karens come to prison. It's such an entertaining post, so go check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one.